Ian, what do you see out there as potential black swans for 2009, meaning unforeseen, unexpected threats?
I think well, there's one thing that I think people aren't paying enough attention to at this point. It's probably Mexico. We're familiar with the fact that just south of America's borders, we have a significant and growing security problem. A group of narco criminals have effectively declared outright war against the Mexican state. No one I talk to believes that's going to get better in 2009. But the real question is, to the extent that the United States has been sort of trying to help the Mexicans with the security situation, that they've been trying to get a handle on sort of providing medical care and security for those in the Mexican government and the militias and the rest that have been fighting against these narco criminals, America and Americans on the ground in Mexico could increasingly become a target. If that happens, the headline around Mexico is going to be much, much greater. Right. So that's one thing I think we aren't really thinking much about that could definitely grow.
How are we doing on responding to natural disasters? We had the tsunami and then Katrina and so on. I mean, is this an area that we need to be more concerned about, or do you think that we've learned lessons from recent history?
We've learned a lesson from Katrina. We have.
Yeah.
We've learned that we can really muck up a response to a domestic crisis of almost unheralded proportions, and it doesn't matter much for domestic U.S. stability. There is a significant reserve in store in support for the American political franchise. You've got a large percentage of the New Orleans population that's gone, and it's not going to come back. Right. And the city's not getting rebuilt properly, and the levees aren't being funded to the degree that they need to, and nobody seems to really care, because American comfort as a country is sufficiently great that you can get away with mistakes like that. It's not clear to me that that will continue ad infinitum. I mean, if the American economic downturn becomes more severe, or if we have a crisis that is sufficiently great, a natural disaster, that it affects decision makers, or it affects elites who affect decision makers, then I think we have a different sort of story.
Right. Well, I would think even things like our National Guard, the way in which our system works. I mean, one of the reasons we had problems in Katrina was the National Guard was in Iraq, right?
Certainly.
So it would seem to be a time to perhaps revisit some of our organizational structure and principles.
Well, I think the question is, you look at what happened in the 2008 elections, and you see people like Ron Paul, who had no electoral capacity whatsoever, raising a lot of money. You see Huckabee with this sort of populist homespun message doing extremely well. People didn't expect it because they were talking about focusing on the homeland. That, Ron Paul was actually saying, how can you support cash to Sudan when you can't fix Katrina? Right. Now that message, I suspect, in 2012 will have a much greater resonance than it did in 2008. And I am concerned that a rise of neo-isolationism in the United States is structural. Doesn't mean they win, but we're going to see more of it.
It's there.
And of course there are consequent dangers of protectionism and the rest that will lead to absolutely.
I had a black swan that I thought of too, and I hear about this a lot, primarily from actually Pentagon people, and that's fear of cyber war or some sort of cyber attack. Is that something that you've thought about at all? And what's the level of threat?
The Latvians have spent a lot of time thinking about it. Absolutely. When there was that back and forth with the Russians not so long ago, and it was coordinated, and they think it came from the government, but all of a sudden Latvian websites and banks just were not functioning online.
But I imagine a total internet slam, gone, shut down in this country. I mean,
I'm skeptical, and I'm skeptical because the internet is not like global oil. It is diffuse, exactly. And in fact, I would make the argument that long term, one of the great benefits of moving to alternative energy sources is the fact that the global energy complex could become more decentralized. More, in other words, like the internet and less like oil. Because if you're really concerned about terrorists shutting down a pipeline and all the rest, you're not as concerned about terrorists taking down the entire web. Now, God forbid we're wrong with the super virus. But the fact is, viruses have been growing in the computer systems exponentially, and thus far, BlackBerries seem to work.